So welcome to the Business Leadership Workshop hosted by Pastream. And today we're really going to be talking about building your confidence at work. And so this can look a lot of different ways, but today, we're going to talk about one particular skill that helps to build that confidence. So my name is Lauren Pizer. I am the VP of Learning Experience at Pastream. So that means that I've designed worked on teams to design all of the content in our courses. And I've been teaching for several years in a variety of topic areas. But today's goal is really to help you to tackle one of the most crucial and underutilized power skills in the workplace, which is how to give and receive feedback. And this is also really about how to have difficult conversations at work. Because when we know how to have difficult conversations, we can be more confident in our role as leaders. And so today is really about how you have those kinds of tense, difficult, feedback-oriented conversations with people that you work with and people that you work for. So we're going to talk a little bit about why this is important, and then I'm going to give you a very specific framework for how to give feedback and how to have a difficult conversation. And then we're going to talk a little bit about receiving feedback. It might be obvious, but I want to talk a little bit about why feedback matters so much in the workplace. So I don't know if you know all these stats. Many of these were new to me, but about half of all workers become disengaged when they get little or no feedback on the job. And over 80% of employees say that they appreciate both positive and negative feedback. And most employees want more feedback. So what I'm trying to tell you with this is that we want more feedback. The people that we work with and work for want more feedback. But the question is how do we give that? And how do we have that kind of a difficult conversation with the people that we work with? So people want more feedback, and it makes our team stronger. So when you can bring feedback into your work as an individual contributor or as a manager, you're helping people have greater awareness on their work and how they're doing. This helps to improve a team's effectiveness, it helps individuals to grow, and it just overall makes teams and companies better places to work and more efficient and effective places. So the case is definitely out there for giving and receiving more feedback, but it generally doesn't happen because people are intimidated by these kinds of conversations, and rightfully so. What do I really mean when I say feedback? Well, I'm talking about a moment when you might manage somebody that's arriving late to work and not really pulling their weight, right? It could be somebody that is a coworker that is taking on a project with you, but they're doing much less than you. That might be a moment for feedback. Or maybe you notice that your manager is not providing guidance that you need for your job. These are all moments on the job where a difficult conversation is needed and required. And feedback is usually seen as a moment when you have to tell somebody that they did something wrong, right? You didn't support me. You left early and left me with this whole mess at work, right? That is a very scary conversation to go into for many people. Maybe not for everybody, but for me, it's actually pretty scary to go into. But I started to reframe feedback and start thinking about feedback and difficult conversations differently, because they're really about opening up a dialogue with somebody else. They're really about discovering and listening and exploring a situation with somebody else to understand what's going on. It's not about telling them that they did something wrong. It's more about opening up the conversation, and that makes it much less scary. So if we reframe feedback from this scary conversation to more of a conversation to figure out like what's really going on with somebody, then that might look like something different, right? So it's not about talking to a peer that you feel is not pulling their weight in a project. It's really about sharing your frustration over unequal work with a peer and learning more about what might be contributing to it. It's not saying you're not pulling your weight, you're not doing the right thing. It's saying I'm frustrated because I don't feel that the work is evenly distributed, and I want to know how you feel about it. Another way to reframe this, let's say you want to talk to your direct report about low quality of work that you're receiving. This might look like, hey, I'm noticing a lower quality of work, and I want to discuss with you what expectations for your work have been set and what expectations haven't been set, and learn more about what might be going on, right? It's about the dialogue. And finally, let's say you need to talk to your manager because they're micromanaging you. You're not going out in there and saying, I hate when you do this and you don't let me do this. It's really about sharing how you feel about being micromanaged and the way that it affects you at work. And then asking questions to understand why your manager is doing this, right? So I'm trying to reframe these difficult conversations because a lot of times we build them up in our head to be this very big thing. And really, when we look at them differently, they take on different meaning. So let's talk a little bit about how to give feedback, okay? And what I want to present to you is a framework that I learned when I was in school, but is also actually taught in business schools and in graduate schools across the country. And so it's this concept of the net. It's called the net. And I'm going to explain what this means and how you can give feedback and have difficult conversations using the net. Then we're going to talk about what happens after you deliver that information. You want to listen and get curious, and then you want to talk about next steps. So let's start with step one. When you're ready to give a difficult conversation, here's what you're going to do. So you're going to use this concept called the net. And here, let me explain it to you. So the net, it's like a tennis court net, right? It's got two sides. There's two sides. On one side of the net are you, right? Your feelings, your interpretations, your needs, your assumptions about things. And this stuff on this side of the net, only you know these things, right? I don't know what your feelings are. I don't know what your needs are. Only you know what's happening on that side of the net. On the other side of the net is the person that you're talking to, right? That you want to deliver feedback to. And they have their own set of feelings and needs and interpretations. And that stuff is not known to you, right? You don't know their feelings or their needs or their interpretation of a situation. All you know is what you saw and what you experienced. So when you're delivering a difficult conversation, you want to say things that stay as close to your side of the net as possible. So this is conceptually difficult to kind of wrap around. So let me explain what I mean about what it means to stay on your side of the net with your words. So if I said something like, I feel frustrated that this project is being delayed. I noticed that you are often coming into work late. I see, my interpretation of this situation is that something's not working well here. That's you staying on your side of the net, right? That's you saying, I'm talking about my feelings, my noticings, my interpretations. I'm not saying something about you that I don't know about. So when you cross the net, which is what we don't want to do, you might say something like, you don't seem to care. You're angry because, you haven't been getting enough hours at work. You need to do more. You're being careless. That's when I say something like that, I'm crossing the net. I'm making a leap into your feelings and your needs. And I'm saying, I know what you feel and it's not good, right? You're mad, you're angry, you suck. Like that's really crossing the net into another person's space when really we want to be staying on our side of the net. So there are other ways that we cross the net in really subtle ways. And I do this all the time in my personal relationships. So this is something that is helpful to think about, not just at work, but outside of that, right? So when we say something like, I feel like you're angry, I feel like you're not prioritizing this project. I feel like you are. That's actually crossing the net, because what you're saying is I know what your feelings are, and they're that you're angry or that you're mad. And again, it's crossing the net instead of staying on your side of the net and only talking about your experience. So let me give you some more examples of what it looks like to stay on your side of the net, okay? I noticed that you let someone else create that project plan. I see that as your responsibility. Do you also see that as your responsibility? Is that also an expectation that you have, right? It's not saying you let somebody else create the project, like that's your responsibility. You're saying, look, I noticed that you let somebody else do it. Do you see that as your responsibility or not? Another thing you could say is, in that meeting or in that interaction, I interpreted what you said as frustration. Like, that's what I'm sensing. Is that how you really feel? Right? So it's very hard to stay on your side of the net, but the goal is not perfection. The goal is that we slowly, instead of blurting out something, we think about, let me rephrase it from my own experience and my side of the net. Because when you do that, you make people much less defensive, and you open up a dialogue instead of shutting it down because somebody has received information that feels like it's attacking them. So a couple of sentence starters that you can use that help you stay on your side of the net. So you could say things like, I noticed this, I'm seeing this, and I'm seeing this behavior or this thing happening, and I'm interpreting that to mean this thing. Is that true? You could say things like, when you didn't show up on time, I felt like you didn't care about the project we were working on. How do you feel? You could say, I'm concerned because this thing is happening. Is this also concerning to you? Or you could say something like, I was expecting to see a certain behavior, but I didn't see it. For example, when this happened, this didn't happen. What's your perspective on this situation? So these are just some ways that you can, formulate a difficult conversation instead of crossing the net and putting somebody on the defensive. Now, I want to say something really quickly about this. This is not the way you will start every conversation, okay? Some people you're super close with, and you're just like, I feel like you're upset. What's going on, right? It doesn't require like you to always stay strictly on your side of the net. But the higher the more intense the conversation is, the higher the stakes are of the conversation, the more you want to stay on your side of the net when you're speaking to them. And this is how you can do that. So I want to do a little practicing with you. So a couple of these two statements, they cross the net. You don't seem like you want my help. Your tone of voice makes me feel like you're upset. Let's practice moving these over, okay, to your side of the net. So what would you say instead of, you don't seem like you want my help? So you might say, I noticed you aren't scheduling time with me to discuss the project. I noticed that you're not asking for my support. I noticed that, I haven't received any emails about what's going on. I'm wondering if that means that you don't want my help. If somebody says, your tone of voice makes me feel like you're upset, you could say, I interpreted your tone of voice in that meeting to indicate that maybe you're upset. Is that how you're actually feeling? Right? So what I have on the left here, it might sound a little weird. You're like, oh, I don't really talk like that. And that's totally okay, because we don't talk like this all the time. But as I said, when the stakes of the conversation are going up, when you feel like this is an intense conversation, you might want to reframe a little bit more so that you're staying on your side of the net. I noticed this behavior, right? What's going on for you? Instead of saying, look, you can't do X, Y, Z. It means this. It makes me feel like you don't care, right? So it's just sort of reframing a little bit of how you approach the conversation. So just to recap this concept of the net, we cross the net all day long because nobody can possibly stay on their side of the net all the time. It just doesn't work that way. But the net is really useful because it helps us when we're saying things to notice when we are crossing it and when we're not, right? Because when the stakes are high, we want to stay on our side of the net and invite the other person to share their perspective. Because when we open up dialogue, we get to the bottom of things a lot faster than when we cross the net and make accusations about other people's feelings. So again, the goal is not perfection. I cross the net all day long with everybody, but we want to move closer to the net over time and when the conversation requires it. So I want to give you an example of a real scenario that I've unpacked with a lot of different people. So imagine that you want to give feedback to one of your peers. This isn't somebody that you manage because the quality of their work is been lacking in attention to detail. It's not up to par in your mind. This is resulting in mistakes and having to redo work and an overall impression from other people that your team and like your department is not really reliable. So let's say this is a conversation you want to have with this person. It's feeling like it might be a difficult conversation, so you decide to use the net. There are a couple of things to consider as you prepare to use the net. What are the expectations that you hold about Jackie's work? Does Jackie's work have to be a certain way? And are those expectations that Jackie also holds, or are those expectations that just you hold? Have they ever been told to Jackie, right? So that's one thing to consider. And then you also want to have examples, right? Whenever you're going into a difficult conversation, and an example where Jackie is lacking attention to detail. So you want to have that in your head before you go in. And this is what you could say, right? Lately, I've noticed more mistakes than usual in the flyers, in the work, right, that's going out to our customers. I feel that this is causing our team to lose some credibility and reliability with other departments and really ultimately our customers. So for example, recently we had to edit the summer flyers again, and the sales team, when that happened, suggested that we actually hire another person to speed up the work. So, I know that some mistakes are inevitable, but lately these mistakes have been happening more frequently, and it makes me feel like, our team is letting people down. So I'm curious how you're feeling about this and whether you're also noticing this as well. So there's always ways we could make this better, right? This probably isn't a perfect way to deliver it, but it's keeping more on your side of the net and staying more with what you're noticing and inviting Jackie to share their perspective. So we just talked about the net, but the net is not the only part of having a difficult conversation. When you are having that conversation, you need to also listen and be curious, and then you need to close the conversation with next steps. So let me tell you about what I mean by that. So during and after giving feedback, it's very important to listen and ask follow-up questions, okay? So both people ideally are listening and getting curious, but at least you, the person that's talking, should be also listening. And here's what that means. So after you give feedback, there's like a lot of feelings of like, oh my God, I did the wrong thing. I said the wrong thing. But it's important that you trust that the other person can handle this information. And then, as I said, listen to what they have to say back. Because if you deliver feedback using the net, then you're going to inevitably ask them a question like, hey, like, do you feel this way? Is this your perspective? And that's when you want to listen for what their side of the story is. And some ways that you can do that, or you can say things like, okay, I've just shared my thoughts with you, my feelings. I'd like to hear your perspective. Or can you tell me more about why, can you tell me more about why you said what you said, or why you did what you did? I just want to understand. Or you can say, does my interpretation of this situation resonate with you, right? Like maybe I'm like, what's your interpretation? Because this was mine, right? So it just takes the ante down a little bit. It cools the conversation off a little bit and it lets them talk, right? Because they're not defending themselves when you say, can you tell me more about this? They're not getting in defensive mode. They're actually getting in a mode of, oh, this person actually wants to know what's going on with me. I'm going to tell them. So once we've listened, there's been a little back and forth, you want to determine next steps with the other person. Okay. So you don't want to just have a conversation that's difficult and then be like, okay, bye, see you tomorrow, right? You want to make sure you have time to wrap up the conversation and talk about what everybody's going to do differently as a result of this conversation. Okay. What's going to happen next? So some things you can say are, hey, let's discuss what we can both do now that we've had this conversation. You could say, let's discuss like what we're going to do if something like this happens again, so we don't repeat the same pattern. Or you could even say like, look, I've got to run right now. This has been a really helpful conversation, but I really do want to continue it. So can we schedule like a follow-up conversation for tomorrow to finish this conversation, right? I want to make sure we talk about next steps. So there are different ways that you can end this conversation, but you don't want to do so without talking about what's going to happen next. So I've gone through the net. I've explained to you kind of what that looks like. But I want to talk a little bit about what it feels like to receive feedback. Okay. And how to handle that, because a lot of times we're on the receiving end of a difficult conversation or feedback, right? And so what does that look like and what do we do? So we also want to be listening, okay? As hard as that is when you're hearing something critical, you want to listen and you want to ask questions. Then we got to remind ourselves it's not personal. I'll explain to you why it's not personal. And then we want to cultivate and remember that we want to have a growth mindset about our work and ourselves as individuals. I'm going to explain what that means too. So first step, you're in a difficult conversation. You may not know it's a difficult conversation, right? Sometimes you're not aware until you're halfway in. Oh, okay, we're talking about this, right? So in those moments, I want you to listen and I want you to ask follow-up questions. So this could look like, okay, you're hearing something critical, you're hearing something, and you're like, can you tell me more about why you feel that way or what you saw that made you feel that way about me or about the situation? You can say, what specifically do you think I could do to improve or to make this dynamic better? You could say, actually, my interpretation of the situation was different. It was this. What makes you think it was this other way? Let's talk about it. And finally, let's say, there's something that is going on, right? And you can say, look, I agree. There's an issue here. I've been contributing to this dynamic, but there are other things that are important for you to understand. And I want to tell you about those things, right? So the goal here is that you listen, but then you also say something that gets to a deeper level of understanding, because you don't want somebody to just say to you, hey, like, it feels like you don't care about this project. You want to say, can you tell me more about why you think I don't care? Can you give me an example where, you felt that I didn't care? It's very hard in that moment to not get super, super defensive. Okay. But it's like, take a deep breath and then try to get curious and ask follow-up questions to understand what's really going on here. Because a lot of times when someone comes to you with feedback, it's not only about you, but it's a lot about them and what's going on for them. And so when you ask follow-up questions, you get a little bit of a deeper understanding of what's going on for somebody. Maybe they're super stressed out, right? Maybe they've got stuff going on at home and that's impacting this feedback, but at least you want to get to the bottom of that. So the second thing that I want you to think about as you're in a conversation or getting feedback or in any of these moments is that it feels very personal in the moment, because somebody is saying, like, they might not be using the net. So they're saying, you did this, you're doing this, you're not caring, you're late, this is a problem. But it really isn't personal, because feedback is really, about your behavior, and it's about something that maybe you said or did, but it's not about you as a person, right? I might make somebody upset, but that's because of something that I said or I did, or a look that I gave, or something that maybe I didn't really mean to say in the way that I said it, right? But that doesn't mean that I'm a bad person for doing that. It just means that my actions had an unintended consequence on somebody else or impact on somebody else. And now it's time for us to get to the bottom of it, right? So this is the hardest part of difficult conversations, is that it feels like the person is attacking you, but really they're attacking a behavior or a word or something that you said. So the last kind of tip around receiving feedback is that I want you to think about, the fact that we're all human here and that we make mistakes. And the point of being at work and being a professional is not that you get no feedback, right? And you never do anything wrong. Like, we're not, in our jobs because we've done everything right. Like, we're in our jobs because we're human. We make mistakes, we learn and we grow from them, right? And so when you're getting feedback, it's an opportunity to grow and to learn, because we're all humans and we're going to be making mistakes in our jobs and with our behaviors for the rest of our lives. So also, as I said, when you're receiving feedback, this is one person's opinion, okay? So it has value, but it's one person, and it's not everybody thinks this about you. So when we're getting this feedback, it's helpful to know the difference between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. So somebody with a fixed mindset will go and feel like there's nothing that they can change about their personality, that there's nothing that they can change about their skills. They are who they are. So when you get feedback, it hurts really bad because you're who you are, right? You can't change. You're a stable, unchangeable person. If you know and recognize that we are all capable of growing, and you have that growth mindset about yourself, you will believe and know that our intellectual capabilities, our talents, our skills, even aspects of our personality are always changing and growing. And so someone is giving you feedback about yourself, and you can choose to incorporate it or you can choose not to, but you are an individual that can grow and evolve and change in various ways. You're not, an unchangeable being. So just remember that, this dynamic is at play when you are receiving feedback. And it really helps to understand, how am I looking at myself right now? Why am I so defensive? I'm defensive because my feelings are hurt, or because I think that I can't change. And just unpacking that a little bit when you're the recipient of a difficult conversation or in a difficult conversation yourself. So I want to talk a little bit about Past Dream, but then I also really want to take some time to answer your questions, because that's kind of the most fun part of these webinars for me, is getting any questions that you have in the chat and thinking, they can be, you can actually submit a question anonymously. And so I kind of want to know, what questions do you have about difficult conversations, either, at work, maybe it's some stuff in your personal life that can be applied to work, but I'm really interested in knowing, what are your questions about the net? What are your questions about difficult conversations? So as you guys are thinking through that, I want to just tell you a little bit about Past Dream. I know many of you are in a Past Dream program, but we offer a lot of different programs. So we offer programs in digital marketing, Salesforce, project management, data analytics. And if you check out paststream.com/blog/eligible, you'll get a taste of our programs, get to see what's out there and see kind of which ones you're eligible for to be paid for by your employer. So all of this information is the kind of stuff that, we try to incorporate into our coursework. But, I hope tonight was helpful for you in thinking about confidence and how you can add this skill to your toolkit as a leader and as an individual.